My name is Marcus, and I'm here on behalf of Fracture Sounds to show you Soft String Soloists, their new library designed for emotional, nuanced performances, especially focused on softer dynamics. Unlike a lot of solo string libraries that can sound overpowering in an arrangement, this one is crafted to blend seamlessly with other instruments, offering a warm, delicate tone that's become a hallmark of neoclassical scores. It also sports the interface and engine features that made their debut in the previous library, Brass Band Soloists, including the fantastic Smart Legato engine. In this walkthrough, I'll take you through the instruments, controls, and the innovative programming behind the library, and hopefully you'll be able to hear how it stands out as one of the most realistic solo string libraries available. Let's begin with a quick overview of the instruments. All of the instruments have been recorded in situ, which means on the left we have the solo violin, which has a bright and airy sound. In the centre, often overlooked in solo string packages, is the viola, which straddles the timbre between the violin and the cello. Opposite the violin, on the right-hand side, is a warm and delicate solo cello. The first articulation is legato, of which we have two types. When at a low velocity, the portamento transitions will be triggered, which are slower and more expressive glides. Performing the same note twice in a row will trigger a bow change repetition. And a new feature with Soft String Soloists, you can use a momentary key switch or the pitch bend wheel to control the attack and release samples. With the key switch pressed or the pitch wheel bent downwards, the first note in a phrase will have a slow attack, ramping up to the target dynamic. And likewise, when the last note is lifted, it will trigger a slow release, gradually diminuendoing to silence. And these are purposefully recorded to capture the expressive sound of the musician performing these dynamic changes in a much more realistic way than if we were to just use the mod wheel, say. And on that note, let's have a look at the controls and articulations, starting with the dynamics, which is controlled by the mod wheel. The volume range of this control can be extended using the slider in the interface's bottom right-hand corner. Pulling this all the way down reduces the volume difference caused by the dynamics, but the timbre will still change. And pulling the slider all the way up creates a wider volume range, meaning with the mod wheel all the way down we get absolute silence. The next articulation is called sustain. Unlike the legato, which is monophonic, the sustain articulation allows you to play chords. We then have harmonics, which have a beautiful airy quality. Now is a good time to demonstrate the colour control, which uses a carefully engineered EQ curve tailored to this instrument. It's an easy way to quickly dial in the sound that fits the composition you are working on. All the way down, the sound is darker and muted, with the bow noise tamed, and at the maximum we get a brighter and sharper sound. The next articulation along offers a sustain with the slower attack and release shown earlier. And on the bottom row is a collection of different shorter articulations. Unlike other string libraries that often have more traditional staccatos, for instance, Fracture Sounds have recorded gestures, which are slightly longer and more emotive to better suit the theme of the library. Here is the first gesture. And short articulations are always a good time to hear the microphone positions, for which we have a mix of close, mid and far mics. If you drag this handy perspective slider over to the close mix, here is what those mics sound like on their own. Then let's isolate the mid-room mics. The fastest way to do this is resetting the perspective slider by command clicking. In Windows that would be control click, and then I'm going to just solo the mid mics. And finally, the far mics at the back end of the hall. The perspective slider is a great way to blend the mics in a natural and easy way, but you can also just do your own thing if you like. I'm going to reset this and then show you what the longer gesture sounds like. The final two articulations for the cello are short and long swells. Let's start with the short. When I keep the keys held down, the full length of the swell is heard. However, if I release the keys early, this will shorten it. Next, the long swell, which features a bow change in the middle. And of course, an even longer swell can be achieved with the slow sustain, if required. Finally, the last two controls on the top row, stereo width and reverb. The stereo width narrows or intensifies the stereo spread of the instrument. And if you want to build upon the reverb provided by the room mics, you can use the reverb effect here. If we click on these cogwheels here, we have room and convolution options for more natural reverbs, or you can use shimmer for something a little more ambient. This is the solo violin in Soft String Soloists, and as you can hear, currently sat on the left of the stereo field. That is because I have it placed in situ under the instrument placement setting down here on the left. However, if I move this into custom position, you can see we now have multiple options to place the violin anywhere in the room. For example, I can place it on the opposite side where the cello is. Or if I wanted the violinist to be front and centre, I can do that too. This mode uses a wide array of impulse responses captured in the same room through the same microphone setup as the instruments themselves. Not only does this sound way more natural than panning, it means we can still mix the mics the same as in situ mode. The final option for instrument placement is center stereo mode, which is captured simply with a stereo pair slightly further back from the main spot mic. This gives us a naturally centered image and the flexibility to use the instruments in many different contexts where a less roomy sound is desired. Going to put this back into in situ and then play around with the other articulations. Here is the sustain, which allows us to play polyphonically. Like the cello, there is also an alternative sustain with a slower attack and release. And harmonics, which have a beautiful fragility to them. There is a single gesture with the violin, which has a lovely vibrato at the end for added emotion. And if I move the perspective slider, you can hear the difference between the intimacy of the close mics and the sparsity of the far mics. We have three options for swells, starting with the short, medium, and finally long. Moving on to the viola, this instrument really glues the collection together. It has the brightness of the violin whilst maintaining the warmth of the cello and bridges the gap between the two perfectly. As with brass band soloists, this instrument offers two legato modes. I won't go into too much detail here as there is a separate video on the Fracture Sounds channel which explains these modes in depth, as well as why you might want to use one versus the other. But in short, both modes adapt to your playing speed to allow realistic slow and fast playing, but in different ways. Smart mode uses look ahead to see what's coming up in advance and adjusts the samples ahead of time, which means each note has a fixed latency. That is, the delay between you pressing the key and the transition being completed. Classic mode, on the other hand, simply cuts into the samples at different amounts depending on how fast you're playing, which results in a snappier feel under the fingers when playing quickly, but means the latency will be inconsistent and likely not sound quite as realistic. I've oversimplified it in the interest of saving time, but if you want the grisly details, I highly recommend watching the video by Will Bedford, linked below or above me on the right. Sticking with smart mode, I mentioned that we have a fixed latency, which is adjusted using this slider here. A higher latency value means the further ahead the engine can look, and the more realistic the performance will be. The fact it's fixed is actually incredibly useful, as it allows you to quantize the MIDI to a grid and have the notes stay perfectly in time. Here's how it works in practice. To start with, I'll reduce the latency down to 0, allowing me to record something in more easily. Now that that's recorded, I'm going to quantize, and I can set the latency back to 300 milliseconds. Now, in the past, this is where I would start dragging notes ahead of the beat and stuff, but because the latency is fixed, all I need to do is go over to the track delay in Logic and set this to negative 300 milliseconds, which means the notes are now going to sound perfectly in time. I will also turn on delay CC data as well, which means that my dynamics will align with the notes. Now, when I play this back, you will notice it will sound more realistic and everything is in time, even the non-legato articulations. Right, let's take a look at the other articulations in the viola. Here are the sustains. The harmonics. And as with the other instruments, the alternative sustain with a slower attack and longer release performed naturally by the player. Like the violin, there is a single gesture. And with the viola, you are placed right in the middle of the hall at Nave Studios. So let's change this with the custom position and place the viola in different areas. Going to put this back to in situ, and last but not least, here are the different swells. Worth mentioning that if you want to get a feel for what this library sounds like at home, for free, you can simply download the Fracture Sounds Blueprint String Trio, which has the same microphones and musicians as Soft String Soloists. If you enjoyed this walkthrough, consider giving it a thumbs up and checking out the product page linked below to find out more about Soft String Soloists, including a link to the user manual which has all of the specifications. Otherwise, let us know your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the Fracture Sounds YouTube channel for more videos featuring this library coming soon, and I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.
Thank